from your point of view, what Ukraine should and may expect from Vilnius summit of NATO?
Well, it's funny. I know you wanted to do this interview last week, and perhaps that would have been a better time to do it, because of course over the weekend we got the president coming out and saying that we're not going to make it easy for Ukraine to join NATO, which is a hard thing to hear. I mean, Ukraine is more qualified than most NATO states to be in NATO. I mean, it's got I would say, if we're to enter NATO, it would have the second most powerful military in NATO, and perhaps even the first. I mean, the U.S. Army hasn't been tested in some time now, whereas we see the Ukrainian Army sort of on the front line doing really extraordinary things. So to me, I mean, it makes intuitive sense to put Ukraine in NATO, and you work it all out, so that, I know what really scares a lot of countries with bringing Ukraine in NATO is potentially becoming party to this conflict and putting troops on the ground to defend Ukraine. And I'm sure Ukraine would agree to saying, okay, if you condition it on our victory and we get to join immediately after victory, we will accept this. And to me, that would be actually the best case scenario, is to say, yes, Ukraine will be a member upon victory, which is much better than in 2008 in Bucharest, where we did say at the summit, all NATO states said Ukraine would be a part of NATO in 2008. So, I mean, we really need to be careful not to now walk back our commitments, which is that Ukraine will be a member of NATO. I mean, we said it a long time ago. So, we need to kind of stop dancing around the issue, put some conditionality on it, and get it done. I would imagine that the administration, to some extent, has said it wants to prioritize weapons. I think weapons are the right priority, but that said, one should also recognize how important NATO membership is for the Ukrainian cause. That's what Ukraine is fighting for. Ukraine must be a member of NATO. So we should recognize how important that is for Ukrainian morale and the Ukrainian future, and make a very strong sign, which would be concrete and specific conditions for membership at Vilnius.
One of your topic of interest is kleptocracy. And the President of the United States, he mentioned, maybe not directly, but I think he think about corruption when he made this statement about possible accession to NATO. From your point of view, is it really the most serious problem of Ukraine? I agree that this Ukraine has problem with corruption, but maybe the other members of NATO, they have the same problem, and this is not the reason to say that, guys, you should not be here with us. From your point of view, how serious this problem in Ukraine and how deep this problem?
Look, the most serious problem in Ukraine is Russia. And it's very important that Russia be pushed out of Ukraine, period. I mean, that's much more important in many ways than corruption. Now, I do want to say that corruption is one of the reasons Russia invaded. I mean, corruption across the West, really, and in Ukraine, corruption was weaponized by Russia to weaken our societies from within. And Russia was extremely successful on that front. It was successful in Ukraine, particularly under Yanukovych. It was also successful in Germany with buying a former chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder, who is still working for Russia amazingly. Of course, Germany is infiltrated by Russia much more deeply than just Gerhard Schroeder. It's infiltrated in various ministries. It's infiltrated throughout particularly the Social Democratic Party, the SPD, which is, of course, the Chancellor's party, Olaf Scholz's party, but it's also Chancellor Merkel, who, of course, started building Nord Stream 2 after the initial invasion in 2014. So, I mean, it's an extraordinary thing to do after this invasion of Ukraine. It is in Hungary, obviously. You almost can just leave it there. I mean, it's really extraordinary, the extent to which the corruption's there. I mean, so I'm just saying, like, yes, corruption is all over the place. Corruption remains a problem in Ukraine, one that Ukrainians are cognizant of, one that Ukrainians have done a lot to fight. I have no doubt it will be sort of defeated in the long run, because otherwise why fight like this? Obviously, I think that Ukrainians have a very specific and focused and visionary idea of what Ukraine is going to be in the future. And it's going to be a Ukraine totally under the rule of law. They're going to curb corruption down to a level that it exists in sort of other countries. But I mean, there is a role, of course, the West has played in this. I mean, I've emphasized that role over and over and over again, the role of the so-called enablers, the lawyers and bankers and real estate agents and so on and so forth, reputation launderers who have taken oligarch money and helped to perpetuate this corruption. But in fact, Ukraine is fighting corruption every day. It fights Russia. And the defeat of Russia will be the greatest triumph against corruption ever, bigger than anything we've seen in the last 30 years since the end of the Cold War. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that corruption isn't a problem, because I think everybody kind of knows it is. But I think that Ukrainian tolerance for it is lower than it's ever been. Ukrainians are doing a really good job fighting it. I don't anticipate that it'll be a problem in the future. And of course, you point out that that corruption is a problem for other countries. It absolutely is. The problem that Ukraine faces is these other countries are already part of NATO and the EU.
Let's imagine that you are president of the United States, and what you would do on this position towards Ukraine during this summit in Vilnius, if you would president of United States instead of Joseph Biden?
Oh boy, if I were president of the United States, that's a nice fantasy, Vitaly. Thank you for that. Well, I'm not even an elected politician, so I think, as you said at the top, I have the ability to sort of speak about this without thinking about constituents or anything like that. It's a nice position to be in. And of course, there are other considerations with regard to elected politicians, and certainly the president of the United States. And it's not an easy job. And I guess I really want to emphasize that it's not an easy job. My move here would be to give Ukraine, basically, rally the NATO countries, which, you'd really have to, because I think that there's more resistance to Ukraine joining NATO outside of the United States. Personally, I think there's some people that aren't speaking up, and not just Hungary. Hungary is small and against everything and can largely be beaten on a lot of these things. But I think that, a country like Germany, which pushed off Ukraine's NATO membership for a very long time and has been behind sort of behind on every single move to support Ukraine on this, including at the very beginning, almost hoping Ukraine would just stop fighting, please, so we could get back to business as usual, which is a really absurd position. I think that the president is trying to hold this alliance together and not cause undue friction. I don't think that's a good justification, but I think it's an explanation. What I would do is, push these countries and rally these countries to give Ukraine membership conditional upon victory. I think that Ukraine must return to its 1991 borders. Once it does, once the last Russian has left Ukraine, really pushed out of Ukraine, Ukraine will be given NATO membership, or will be invited to join NATO, and that will prevent any war in the future. I mean, we should recognize that giving Ukraine NATO membership isn't just good for Ukraine; it's good for us. I mean, there's a reason that Russia has invaded Georgia and has invaded Ukraine and has not invaded the Baltic states. It's going after sort of what it sees as the low-hanging fruit, the non-NATO states. If you give countries NATO membership, then they don't get invaded. That's how it works.
What about the long-distance missiles or fighting jets? Would you provide them to Ukraine?
Of course, they should have been provided over a year ago. I mean, they should have been provided before the full-scale invasion, at the very least, immediately after the full-scale invasion. I mean, so one of the reasons that a lot of weapons were provided before the invasion is because we had fallen for a lot of Russian disinformation. I mean, the West still falls for a lot of Russian corruption and disinformation. But, at that point, we were basically, eating Russian disinformation by the spoonful, and had believed that Ukraine would not fight, basically, had believed that Ukraine would fall in 3 days. Now, when it became clear that Ukraine was fighting and was in fact facing down the second largest army in the world with shoulder-mounted rocket launchers, then it was like, oh my God, so we're not going to lose this equipment if we give it to Ukraine. Ukraine's going to use it to fight Russia. At that point, at the latest, everything should have been sent to Ukraine. Everything. We should have been loading it up. We should have prepared a shock and awe style logistics network. What prevented us from doing it at that point was not the fear that Ukraine would lose the equipment, which it had been previous. It became this very nebulous fear of escalation. The notion that if we started loading Ukraine up with equipment, then Russia would, I don't know. I mean, to this day, escalation is kind of I think what people must mean is the use of tactical nuclear weapons. But honestly, the use of tactical nuclear weapons makes no sense for Russia, because then it gives a carte blanche for NATO intervention, because it would take China and Brazil and India and basically sort of set them against Russia, because that's a bridge too far even for them. So I don't know. I mean, we kind of constrained ourselves over this idea of escalation, but everything should have been sent a long, long time ago.